lot of juniper treatments.
Yeah.
So a
Okay,
lot of
yeah.
juniper and upland
Right.
work,
Okay.
and then which is already going on, but
Yeah.
it's challenging to just the scale of doing that
bet,
too
yeah.
is massive.
Right.
And then beginning to implement beaver dam analogs through here and think of that as a multi-phased approach, you know. So it's not a technique where you can just set it and forget it kind of thing, you know, like you've got to come in and do some work and let the channel adjust and respond, and then do a little bit more work, and then kind of think of it as a routine, more frequent routine, you know, additions or modifications rather than trying to engineer a channel.
Right.
And be flexible and work around the system, because there are periodic, I mean, this area is very susceptible to massive summer thunderstorms, and so there's very infrequent massive events coming through here, so you just have to kind of flex with that and not try to build a specific channel, because it could get taken out pretty quickly.
So would you expect in that time frame, I think that's a really great
it's interesting
question.
to think about it,
Would you expect, hope for the water table in here higher and a wetter floodplain and some potential ponds and things like that in this area?
10 years post, so if we exclude the NEPA permitting process, and we're just talking 10 years post BDA installation, you could see some pretty dramatic responses in here. In part because, the growing season is longer, so you can, these alder trees over there are just a few years old.
Okay.
So you can get some pretty dramatic vegetation responses if they have access to water. And so with those floodplain treatments, you're trying to provide longer duration access to water. And so if you can do that, with a couple iterations of treatments, you can get some pretty rapid response.
So are cattle completely excluded from here?
I don't know. There's a riparian, there's corridor fences here on this, that the goal is total exclusion. There is, they get through sometimes, but
we maintain the grazing lease on the property that, the ranch that we bought, the first one, Rattray Ranch, had about a 10,000 acre grazing lease along with the deeded acres. And we sold about 8,000 acres of deeded ground to BLM, and we retained the grazing lease, and we're getting the grazing lease on the lands that were conveyed. And there's multiple pastures throughout this whole area, and we are grazing a few according to that approach that we talked about at Cottonwood Canyon. And all of the pastures that have animals in it are all completely fenced. That's a prerequisite of them being able to turn out any cows.
It's in the uplands.
Yeah, it's further up.
Yeah. So we should see nothing down here for 10 miles along the main state line on our side.
That's right.
So does that generate revenue for you?
Marginal. What we've been doing with this operator, who's the same one that we're using at Cottonwood Canyon, and he's been terrific to work with, we have been allowing him to graze at no cost in exchange for him doing all this fencing work, because fencing work's very expensive. And at this point,
you have to keep grazing, or you're going to lose the lease, right? Is that part of
there's some different mechanics there. You can take a period of non-use, and you can also take conservation use, and that's limited. You've got either 2 or 5 years, depending on what it is. And so you do need to have some kind of compliance with the permit in order to maintain it. But the rangeland techs at BLM are very accustomed to working with different landowners and different needs, and they try to inject as much flexibility working with their grazing partners as reasonable for the program. And one of the things that was interesting that they did in terms of changing grazing across the whole Prineville district is they adopted some rules, and I don't know if it was 20 years ago or more, but they created a seasonal window of grazing along the main stem. And what they did was when the water was high and was coming up into the bank, that's when folks are allowed to graze. And because the cows can't get down to the riparian vegetation because it's inundated at that time. Oh. And then when the river comes down, they've got to pull the cows off. And the impacts, and I don't know this firsthand, I've just been told that the impacts were quite dramatic afterwards, because it allowed all these willow communities to grow back up that hadn't been there. Yeah. And it was a really remarkable change. And apparently there used to be a lot of sandy beaches along the lower river that have largely disappeared because all those finds are being captured in these newly established willow thickets. Yeah. Oh. So there's a lot more rocky banks, whereas there used to be sandy banks, or so I'm told.
Yeah, I think that change happened in the early 2000s probably.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. And
yeah.
they also, they can, when the flow is higher, the river becomes a fence because the cows won't cross.
Yeah.
So it helps with the management of, east versus west.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there can be dramatic responses here. You can, like, if you're ever in front of a computer and you're curious and have a half hour to kill, go to Google Earth and look at if you have Google Earth, and then you can look at the time series. Oh. And so look at this and look at the time series. There's shots here going back to definitely the 90s. And it's a little grainy, but you can look at this, the reach here at the mouth, and there's just a little clump of alders right there that you can see go out
really
here,
good.
then out here, and out here.
Yeah.
And then the next reach up, that's upstream of Armstrong Canyon where we come down the road there, there's just a handful of trees there in the 90s. And then the previous landowner changed some, I think they kind of got out of the horse business, somewhere in there, because they just going out and out and out. Now you can't drive, it's just a thicket. You can't even get a four-wheeler through there hardly, whereas back in the 90s you could have just driven up there in a semi-truck.
That's so interesting.
So yeah, it's amazing. If you want some positive hope for the future,
right.
to watch how fast that changed here. And then, those changes on the river are probably not as, doesn't seem to grow alder on the river like it does here, but there have been those changes too there.
And do you think those alder expansions, it has as much to do with removing the animals, but was that also coincide when ODFW started doing the riparian fencing program?
It's definitely helped. Yeah, you can see a bigger jump. And we've done pre and post. We have some pre and post photos of a site. It's 8 miles or so up from here that we sampled it in 2011, and then it was fenced in either late in 2011 or in 2012, and you can, both see it in the photos with the willows coming back into the channel and change in channel profile, and you can see it in the data too, which is nice, in terms of amount of fines and structure of the channel. So yeah, that fencing exclusion definitely helps as well.
Any last questions for Ian before we let him go?
Well, thanks.
Wonderful
Ian.
for doing
Yeah, thank you guys for coming down.
Good.